Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about something a lot of people in tech are trying to figure out right now, how to actually start landing software engineering interviews at top companies. I'm joined by Abbass, who has recently been getting interview traction with companies like Microsoft, EA, JPMorgan, and Roblox. We're going to talk about his job search journey, what helped him start getting these interviews, and what the technical interview process has been like so far. Abbas, thanks so much for joining me today. To start off, can you introduce yourself and give us a little more context about your background, things like what you're studying or studied, what stage you are in your career right now, and what kind of software engineering roles you've been targeting?
My name is Abbass. I'm an early professional. I started my journey back in university. Did a computer science and did a bachelor's degree in computer science, and then later did a master's degree in mathematics. Upon graduating, so straight out of college, and we gotta find you gotta find something. You gotta find a job to apply the knowledge you learned. Software engineering it was, and I did work through a contracting agency at Ford Motor Company. Then while at Ford Motor Company, actually did work on a small startup actually. So it's just that spark for innovation, that spark for that drive for working on something that you're very proud of. And then post Ford Motor Company, I did work at a small company, a remote job based in California, and which brings me to here to eventually discovering Sprout and using Sprout to get those offers like Hillary, our host has mentioned, to get these offers at companies like JPMorgan Chase and EA and Micro.
As you mentioned, you've recently gotten interviews with companies like JPMorgan, Roblox, EA, Micro One. What do you think actually helped you start getting those interviews?
It's really goes down to how do I present my skill set, my experiences, my projects on a resume. Because really, what recruiters look for when they're looking for candidates is okay. So there's this job offer and there's this candidate's resume. So really, you want to outline the key features, the key experiences that go well on the recruiter. Hey, I'm the right person for the job. I can do all of the things um, that the company wants, and I can do them really well. So really, like one thing is you gotta be proud of your achievements, right? And you gotta put those on paper. So really, like focusing on you have a single piece of paper, one page, and really putting all of your experiences, the most key experiences that contribute to the dream role that you want. And really once you do that, you're guaranteed to get a response back from the companies that you're applying to.
Exactly. Alongside with your resume, right? I'm assuming that you also have a portfolio for your application process. Was that something that you feel like was a huge factor and played a huge role in getting these interviews? So there's obviously the resume piece, the cover letter piece, but as a software engineer, the roles is a little bit more technical, I would say, compared to other more business aligned positions that people would apply for. Do you think that played a huge factor, like the projects of work you've done at school, outside of school? Do you think that was very a huge contributing factor to getting these interview offers?
Yes, yeah. So so definitely, you definitely want to get your work out there because, like that's what people see. And if you have a personal website or you put all your projects on LinkedIn, when recruiters they're impressed by your background and they search your name on Google, what's the first thing that they see? And if you have a really well designed website that has all of your projects and pretty much allows the recruiter or the company to see, wow, these are very impressive projects, and it doesn't matter if they're projects at school or the projects or your personal projects, as long as it's kind of like an artifact, kind of like, wow, this is very impressive work. You're showcasing you're showcasing this experience and your expertise. So yeah, I 100% agree and do recommend to you know build a public portfolio of all your works.
Nice, nice. And when you were building your public portfolio, you mentioned website, but what are some key platforms that you feel like a lot of software engineers or people in technical roles should have? For example, maybe having a GitHub, and when they do have a GitHub, what are some things that are non-negotiables that you have to put on these different websites to showcase your portfolio?
Yeah, so think quality, not quantity. Don't think about like I need to have a GitHub with to have to make sure that there are commits every single day. So there are so many green dots that show that I'm an active software engineer, or I need to contribute to project X, which is some open source software that gains traction in order to showcase. Just start very small, like just pick 3 to 5 of your key projects of your key work that you've done, and get them out there, like maintain them and push them to GitHub, and even on those GitHub repos, put demos and video and just so it's very easy to know what the project is about. And the other thing is like I mentioned before, LinkedIn. If you're if you're putting your works out there either through a post or through your profile page, you will likely get other people's reactions and comments. So it's kind of like you're kind of like um seeking opportunities, but in an indirect way. You're active in the software community. Also, like I mentioned before, is to have your own website, whether it's Google Sites or any of the other site building sites, or heck, you can even code your own website, right? And then host it on your own. But the key thing is, like, going back to the very first point I said, like, when a recruiter puts your name, what's the first thing that comes up and pops up so they can learn more about you?
So in this case, as a software engineer, would you say that having your own website is more important, or being able to showcase your work on LinkedIn is a higher priority? Amongst those two, which ones do you think you would really focus more of your energy on when you're applying and actively seeking jobs?
Honestly, our website isn't required. I would say that it's not a high priority. I think the priority here is getting your projects publicly available through any platform you're choosing.
And speaking of projects, I am very curious as to what kind of projects that you worked on. And yeah, if you could share a little bit more about those. And especially when you're interviewing, I'm assuming that your interviewers would ask you about the past work you've done. Could you tell me a little bit more about some of your project ideas or project proposals? Was it something that you decide to come up with on your own, or working on top of another existing project? For example, were your projects more independent based or collaborative? And how did you really showcase that, and how did you make it seem very impactful and very relevant to what you were talking about during your interviews?
If you see the end result, if the end result is already done, will you be excited about it, and will it serve the purpose that you had in mind? And really, like, for personal projects that I worked on, stemmed from one my job at the California company. Pretty much, when you're working with AI agents, the stuff you can build is infinite. You can build so many things that solve so many problems. So really, like, one example that I built was an application that would automate posting to social media, especially for market, which is very relevant for marketing people, and save some time, as well as managing your email inbox, managing different meetings, schedule meetings. So yeah, like, for finding projects, just one, be curious, and two, learn a lot, and three, just go for it. Just failure isn't an option here. It's always going to lead into something that sprouts into something else.
And I think it's very useful for a lot of, especially students, to hear when they're feeling stuck and always sending out their resumes, but not necessarily showcasing their experience. Sophomore, there's a sophomore in college and they're applying for internship roles, right? And they have no experience. They have no official work experience. They're trying to get that experience through this internship. So obviously, the most important way to get that experience out there is by showcasing these projects and showing initiative and showing curiosity and creativity through the projects that you propose, even if you didn't necessarily have that former work experience to apply for different roles. And I think that's where a lot of students get stuck. And I think that's where having and showcasing these projects was very useful on your resume. I think that's, I actually want to backtrack a little bit and ask more about your experience in applying for different jobs. So before those interviews started happening, what did your job search journey actually look like?
Sure. So it varied, right? Um, like, when applying to jobs, like you kind of want to get accustomed to rejections, right? Like don't let rejections hold you back or be an indicator of your worth. It's just a signal, right? That that there are better opportunities out there. So really, like I faced a lot of rejections. I sent out a lot of applications until finally finding the two jobs as mentioned. So really, like been just it is a numbers game, and keep on improving, keep on taking it as feedback for how to improve, and also I did do a lot of networking. I really I can't recommend that more than enough. Network, network, network. If you're targeting a company, find professionals that work at the company. Um even just the initiative alone opens up so many doors, because you can connect with professionals, you can get their experience, you can you can get feedback for how to go about to building your profile to get your foot into the door into that company.
As you were applying to different roles, roughly how many applications were you sending out before things started working and you started hearing back from companies?
So, how many is a good question. There isn't really a number in mind because like I was sending my initial strategy was send out as many applications as possible and maybe you'll get one. Then it later occurred to me that it's not very efficient. Why not take a more targeted approach? To really ask yourself which companies do I want to work for? Where do I see myself working in the coming time frame that you're looking for a job or an internship? So really like kind of take a straight kind of like take a strategic approach to applying to internships or jobs. And then once you target those, just apply to maybe like 10 per day or 10 per every 3 days, right? As opposed to, spend blocking out 2 hours and just apply, apply, apply. So yeah, like my recommendation is like focus more on quality, like what I said about, the GitHub. Focus more on quality applications as opposed to just quantity generic ones because companies do get a lot of.
When you were talking about how networking was very important in terms of your job searching process, did you talk to mainly recruiters or people on the team and just getting your name out there? Was it while you were interviewing or was it prior to applying? Period.
Yeah, so no, so I kind of like took a uh not kind of like a passive approach to it all. Like not like before I apply to a company, I would research the people that work there through LinkedIn, right? Like it was a company I was targeting, and before I began my application, I did find an engineer who had their portfolio, and I did connect I did connect and ask questions about how did you get into this role? Given recommendations, um, of course, introducing yourself as well, and just that brief message, alone, people are always happy to share about their experiences and help people coming out of college and people who want to get those roles. So really, take initiative and it doesn't have to always be recruiters. It can be the target. It can be the person who works at the role that you're targeting.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's a strategy that I tried to use before. And once I started networking correctly, then that's when I started hearing back from um different pe- different places that I've been applying for just because my name's already in the system or people already recognize who I was. Yeah, I think networking is also a very important aspect of the job searching process alongside with having projects to showcase and also like making sure that your resume is at a high quality before you actually submit them. All
Right.
right. So I do want to ask, do you think there was like a specific moment in time where something changed and you started getting interview traction? So obviously you did start using Sprout, but before you used Sprout, did you hear back from any companies when you were applying more manually or without using any tools?
So before using Sprout, the nice thing about Sprout is you can send a lot of quality applications in a very automated manner. But before Sprout, I was going via LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn Jobs. I was going to job boards for different companies and applying that way. And I haven't gotten, for instance, there was this startup, right? A startup based in California. And I did apply to it, and these small companies, you tend to hear back from them very quickly compared to bigger companies. So if you apply to a big company, you likely won't hear back until a month a month, usually. That was the experience for me. But for these small companies, like when you apply to them, you usually hear response back within a week. Especially like, startups and small firms.
For sure, for sure. And I was wondering, was there anything that you changed about your resume itself that helped you start getting interviews? So, for instance, Sprout is a very useful tool in helping you send your applications in a very fast manner, and you reduce redundancy in terms of like autofilling, filling out the same information such as your name, address, H-1B status, and all of that. But do you feel like compared to your original resume and the resumes that you sent via Sprout, was there anything that you've seen has changed or improved that ultimately led you to gaining more interview traction?
Yeah, so prior, like my resume was very standard, right? It was 2 pages long. Like you really need to put yourself into the other side, right? If the other side were to get your resume on some you know job recruiting tool, they're pretty much spending like 10 seconds maybe on a resume. So you kind of want to make like your resume grand, right? Like very easy, like use bold the key, your key highlights, right? And don't make it too long. Try to aim for like a page and a half, no more than 2 pages. Because the key thing here is like if they're interested in your application, they will reach out to you to learn more about you. So yeah, you know, before I began optimizing my resume, I was just it was a very generic, very standard resume, and then I opted to using using LaTeX. It's a kind of like HTML. It's a descriptive language. Like you can like use different fonts and different stylings. I made sure to like add a to a purpose on a very top, so that way it's tailored to every single company that I apply to via Sprout. Optimizations for your resume to get these jobs. Yeah, like pre getting attraction to jobs, my resume was standard after optimizations and then giving it Sprout to tailor it. Results were much better.
No, I actually want to learn a little bit more about the interview process, and I think that's what a lot of people are curious about as well. So, when you landed the initial interview invites, what was the process like when you were interviewing? So, for example, you mentioned interviewing for JP Morgan's software engineering process. What was the interview process like for a software engineering role at JP Morgan? Was it more coding heavy, behavioral, or a mix of both?
Yeah, so once you make it past the initial screening and you speak to and even before you speak to a recruiter, you're often invited to a coding assessment, right? And really, like to prepare for these, often, you know, uh, bust out the books and review the language that the coding assessment is on, like just basic. They're usually not too hard. They're usually very basic programs to do something. And whether using Python or C++, just make sure like you know the syntax really well and you know how to do different how to write different functions and different operations. Once you pass that interview, there may be like a time gap for them to get back to you. At least that how it was like for JPMorgan Chase. But a recruiter will reach out to you and they'll say, "Hey, pass you did pretty well in the coding assessment." She got invited to the way JPMorgan Chase does things is much different than traditional companies. Instead of having like different rounds, every single round is into one interview. So in this one interview, there's a behavioral assessment, there's a technical assessment, and there's also a kind of like whiteboarding session to see like how well you can brainstorm and plan things out for our marathon. So kind of at least for JP Morgan Chase, I think that's unique because you're not really on edge. Like you're not asking yourself, did I pass this interview? Or did I not do good? Will I be promoted to the next round? It's very like, one shot, and then after that, you'll get the decision the very next day. That was my experience with JP Morgan Chase. Yeah.
Gotcha, and it sounds like it's not as traditional in comparison to um, other software engineering roles that my friends would typically apply for. So for JP Morgan specifically, how did you prepare for each step of the process? And I know that everything was condensed into one basically super day
Mm,
interview,
right.
but how did you prepare for interview processes like for the behavioral part, and then there was also the technical part, and you also mentioned the whiteboarding component. So how did you prepare for each step of the interviewing process for that day when you were going into these interviews
Awesome.
for?
So think of like the behavioral interview more so of translating your resume into words, right? You're kind of like showcasing your projects and whenever you're asked about what was the most difficult, what was the most uh project or what's your most proudest achievement in your past work experience, you're kind of like, given the stage to go ahead and to talk more about yourself, talk about these experiences, talk about these bumps on the road that you experienced in the past, and how you solved them, right? So really, when it comes to these ones, I think it's more about, doing mock interviews, right? Like, one thing I did was use your phone and just record answers to these questions, because behavioral questions are very, very standard. Like, they're this based on the interviews that I received, I get asked the same questions, probably as the same question in all these interviews. So really, like you can just Google what are the top 15 behavioral interview questions, and direct responses, and actually record yourself, and then hear yourself, hear yourself, and see, okay, I think explained myself pretty well. After that, for a technical interview, it's like I said, like just review beforehand, and make sure you studied the material beforehand. And for the whiteboarding component, I think it's more so as being open minded, and even when you don't know like the solution, say I'm not sure. Be transparent. You don't have to be 100% right. You can get a long way with just going around the solution, and giving hints and suggestions for how, like, what can be used to solve the problem that the interview is giving you. So really, like, you can just brainstorm out loud. And I found that, like, just putting my thoughts out loud so the interviewer can hear, I would get nods, and that was like affirmation that things were going in the right track.
How would you define what the whiteboarding interviewing process would look like for our viewers? And you mentioned a lot of problem solving, so I'm assuming that you're taking a prompt or a core issue that the interviewer is giving you, and you're expected to create basically blueprints of how you would address that problem, and what your thought process would look like in resolving this issue by creating a prototype or a product.
Of course, of course. So think whiteboarding as thinking very high level, not too technical, kind of like how you would explain something to a business person, a person not in the same field as you, right? So like, you got to think in systems, got to think in components, and pretty much like, okay, so there's this process, and this process is going to go to this other process, and pretty much how are things linked together, as opposed to how does a process work technically. So for the whiteboard interview at JPMorgan Chase, I was paired with one person, with a product manager, and they wanted to build the back end for a shopping platform, right? And here it's like, you have to think of, like, if I'm on the site, and there are all these things that are happening in the background, what different systems must occur so the customer gets a seamless experience. So here there's like there's different, there's different levels of thinking you need to establish, and really, like, addressing everything as much as possible. This may cause like in the server, why not prioritize, this type of database, for instance. Like, just like I mentioned earlier, just be very very, very in depth. Don't think that, okay, no, this idea is wrong. I may not pass the interview if I say this. No, just say it, and you're often likely to go on the right path. So yeah.
Nice, nice. I was also very curious about your other interview process. So obviously, you've interviewed at top high-profile companies such as Roblox, as well as Micro One and EA. So JP Morgan, it's a little bit different compared to the other companies you applied for because it's more fintech, more finance related. But how would you describe your interview process for EA, for instance?
Of course, of course. So the behavioral interview across all these different companies is pretty much the same. You want to practice your speaking skills and how to best showcase, your experience. Right? At least for EA and Roblox, right? Roblox does have an interesting interview coding interview that they have that's unique to them. But pretty much the same preparation was applied to every single interview that I received. Um, and it's actually just interesting. I just remembered for the interview with EA, I felt like, talking is gonna do a disservice to the thing I want to show. So I actually had prepared a slide deck, right? A slide deck. So during the interview, I can say, okay, let me show you this project, and may I share my screen? And then of course they'll agree, and then you can like go into more into detail and better showcase your background and your projects. So it's kind of like sometimes it doesn't have to be all talk and talking to other person. You're also welcome to share your screen if if you're given permission.
I think that's something that not a lot of people typically think about preparing a slide deck show and being prepared to share the screen. And even though it's not mandated typically across interviews, I think it's also useful to have. And it just shows that you're prepared going into
Right.
this. You're ready to show all the work they've done and being able to present it in a way, like as you mentioned earlier, right? You're in a technical position, but how would you explain your work to someone who's not in a technical position? I'm assuming as a software engineer, you are going to be placed in a lot of cross-functional roles, especially when you're talking to people such as your product manager or people even across different business functions. Like, how would you explain your work or your projects to someone that's in marketing? And someone in marketing might not necessarily understand all the technical nuances, but I think having the ability to translate your work, your findings to someone who isn't as well versed in this area, I think it's a very skill to have, especially as a software engineer. I was just wondering for these technical interviews or for the initial screenings, such as the technical assessments, how would you typically prepare for them? And you did mention to really ramp up on reading, doing your homework, but also I know LeetCode is a very prominent tool that a lot of students tend to use when you're practicing for these coding assessments. But yeah, would you say that LeetCode was something that you had to use often? And if so, how often would you practice? And what are some modules or what are some areas that you really recommend for job applicants to focus on?
Yes, liquid is definitely something you can do prior to the interview. Um, uh, and also HackerRank, right? Because like those are the top two. Of course, there's many, and some companies have their own custom coding assessment tools like Roblox. But pretty much yeah, just whenever you get time, just maybe like spend 15 minutes to do the LeetCode style practice. Just because when assessment time comes and you have that time pressure, you're very familiar with it, how it works and like what kind of problem you should expect. That's one thing. The other thing is going back to the reading part is like really review data structures and different algorithms to the different things. And yeah, yeah, just be very open to practicing because practice makes perfect.
For Roblox, that's probably one of the most difficult companies to get into. And just getting like a coding assessment for Roblox is a huge accomplishment, a huge step in your interview process. What was the coding assessment about?
It's relatively public, right? Like if you just go on like Reddit and say a Roblox interview, right? Pretty much it's done through Roblox, right? So it's like a coding assessment is done by a kind of like you're given a task and you get an accomplishment within a time limit, and it's actually pretty unique and pretty interesting and much different than probably by far the most unique interview experience I've experienced throughout my 3 years of job searching.
Also want to hear a little bit more about your Sprout integration into your job searching strategy. So at some point, when you started using Sprout during your job search, how did you first come across the platform and how did it fit into your application process?
Yeah, so the way I found Sprout was pretty interesting, right? Like I was doing things very traditionally using AI but in a very inefficient manner, just ChatGPT on one window and the job application on the other window, and just tailoring things that way. But I feel like it's a very repetitive repetitive procedure, and it takes so much time out of your day. So what I did was like one day when I was on my phone, I was on the App Store, right, and I said, let me see if there's any like apps out there that you can use to apply for you, right? Um, there's a couple, right? But one of them was Sprout, and I did download other ones. I used them all, right? But Sprout was probably, for me at least, the most helpful one of them all, because the job boards keep on updating on a daily basis, and like you can always top up credits, and even the features, like, they're always growing, right? So like like the web dashboard is very useful for like doing resume reviews, like not having just fire and forget applications, like just being able to like make sure everything is good and like even answering to the questions that Sprout may ask you back. I feel like that's key into getting the right resumes to the right roles. Right? So yeah, like my experience with Sprout is very has been very positive and like the app it's a nice interface, right? Like it's very fast. Like swipe left if you like it, swipe right if you want to apply to it. So yeah, like I really like that experience.
That's awesome to hear, and I'm really glad that you had a great, like, user experience when you were using Sprout. I feel like, obviously, at the end of the day, like, the whole goal of what we want as a company is to make sure that our users are able to gain what they need out of the app and eventually retire it, because the point is to get you on and then off, because we want you to land these job interview roles, right? And I'm glad that you did exactly that. For someone watching this who might be applying everywhere but not getting interviews yet, what piece of advice would you give them right now?
One, have a hobby. Don't be fully invested in job application. Find something to vent out to like ease back on the pressure because job hunting isn't an easy task. It's on par with a full-time job. So find a hobby, whether it's painting or running or reading, whatever it may be. Pursue that hobby. Two is read a lot, like for improving your skill set. Like like I really like technical books like this one for learning about AI and ML and machine learning like underneath and for the viewers that it's called AI and ML for Coders and PyTorch if that's what interests you if you're really interested in AI. And the third thing is attend conferences, attend job fairs. It doesn't have to always be online behind a screen. Getting that face to face and immediate feedback is very key and keeps you motivated for applying to jobs. So yeah, like those are my my hobby sorry, those are my feedback for seeking jobs and opportunities.
I am really curious about the job fair and career fair piece, because for a lot of people that might not necessarily be in school, attending these career fairs might not be a accessible resource for them. So I was just wondering, what are some career fairs that you've traveled to or visited that you think really helps you gain visibility in this job market?
Right. So the ones that I've attended have been through my university, right? My university, it's very well known and companies like know that top talent are found at these companies, so they usually come and organize these events, right? They volunteer to be part of these events, and really it's if these fairs aren't accessible to a person to you in your city or to you at your university, you know like went back to my earlier point, like really network and really try to find like local professionals even and like try to get insight about like how can I get that application to that dream company that I'm looking that I want.
When you were interviewing, what do you think recruiters actually care about the most? So, number one priority during these interviews.
Yeah, so recruiters are looking at how well do you fit into the role, into their team if they're the product manager. So you do want to, give the impression that you're the number one best person for the role. So have that confidence, speak with confidence, and yeah, just go with the flow, as they say.
Nice, nice. All right. So, Abbas, really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences, and especially while you're still in the middle of the process, or at least wrapping up the process. So now that you're just deciding between two companies, JPMorgan and EA, which are really amazing places to land offers at. We're rooting for you with the upcoming choices that you have, big decisions. And for anyone watching who's currently navigating the job search grind, hopefully, this conversation gives you some helpful insight into what it actually takes to start landing interviews. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.